Now, Ashraf Afzal is a visiting fellow at the University of Nottingham Center for Conflict, Security and Terrorism. He joins us now live from London. Hi, Ashraf. Tell me what you think the end game is here. Does this action bring us closer to an end to this conflict, or are we looking at now another Iraq scenario with more players involved?
I don't think anybody has an end game in sight. What we have is probably the most complex conflict, certainly in recent times, with a huge number of players with very different objectives and hence very different end states. But if you want to simplify it, there is a bunch of people who want regime change and another bunch of people who don't. And that is a very simple simplification, but within those groups there are very sometimes competing interests and sometimes conflicting interests even within those two blocks. So I think anybody who can suggest an end game is really going to be out on a limb. The problem, I think, here is that this could escalate into something that gets out of control, which involves the conflict spilling out from the region into the larger parties involved, Russia, the US and the West, or somebody might decide to come to some sort of a peaceful solution. And that was, or seemed to be, the way that the Trump administration was proceeding until just 48 hours ago. Right.
But then let me ask you, if now that we're hearing so many countries and allies of the United States condone this strike, with the exception, of course, of Russia, Iran, and the Syrian regime, do you think action like this should indeed be encouraged going forward?
Well, if it is to be encouraged, then what we're doing is we're assuming that the events that led up to it will continue. So this action is in response to a chemical attack. And if chemical attacks continue, then basically an action like this is not going to solve the problem because it's failed to solve it. So I think it's a very difficult question to answer. It is very hypothetical. But what we have, hopefully, is a situation which will de-escalate if the parties involved remain calm, and if the message that whoever is behind these chemical attacks stops them is heard, then hopefully we will have achieved something positive at least, and the conflict can return to its lesser bloody self, but it will continue.
And you said whoever is behind these suspected chemical attacks, we should say. Russia has argued that actually Assad was closer than ever to winning this war, and that there was no reason for his regime to carry out something as horrific and as controversial as a chemical attack on civilians. Do you think there's some merit to that argument, or is Russia, in a sense, deluding itself?
Well, underlying your question is the assumption whether they're right or wrong. And I'm afraid that the truth is a redundant quantity in modern conflicts. What we have is what I refer to as perception dominance. So you're going to continue to get these narratives, conflicting narratives. And the Russian argument here, I'm afraid, is very persuasive. A lot of people cannot see any motivation right now for Assad to have done what he has done, and the outcome, in fact, has been the opposite of what's been in his interest, what was on the table, and that is that the Trump administration has had to do a 180-degree U-turn on its policy of supporting the Russian war against extremism as it was being presented, but now appearing to take sides and say Assad has no future. So the Russian narrative certainly will have a great deal of appeal outside certainly the Western influenced areas.
Okay. Ashraf Afzal, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us, as always, from London.